Welcome to the deep dive. Ever stop to think about something like, well, flour, oil, and salt? Why would ancient divine instructions be so incredibly specific about these everyday things?
It's pretty amazing, isn't it, how much meaning is packed into details like that. They weren't just, random picks.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into that very idea, focusing specifically on the grain offerings you find in Leviticus chapter 2.
Yeah, and we've got some great source material, a detailed meeting summary, and an audio transcript from a really in-depth study session. Lots of rich insights there.
We do. Insights into biblical worship, and maybe surprisingly, how it connects to our lives today.
So our goal really is to go beyond just reading the words on the page. We want to pull out the key nuggets, the ingredients, the rules for preparation, and the spiritual meaning behind it all.
And hopefully you'll have some real aha moments along with us. We'll look at what these detailed instructions tell us about God, about our relationship with the sacred, and how these old practices kind of echo even now in how we think about worship and giving.
It should make some potentially complex ideas feel, well, pretty clear and relatable.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this ancient ritual, starting right at the beginning, the anatomy, you could say, of a grain offering. Leviticus 2 lays out the core requirements pretty clearly.
It does. You need choice wheat flour.
Yeah.
So the good stuff, olive oil, and frankincense.
Right, that really aromatic and frankly quite expensive resin they used in worship back then.
And the way it was prepared is also detailed. The priest takes a memorial portion, like a symbolic piece.
A remembrance.
Exactly, a remembrance. Burns it on the altar, the smoke rises. But here's a fascinating bit. The rest of the offering, that belonged to Aaron and his sons, the priests.
So right away, you see this idea of God's provision woven into the act of worship itself. It sustained the people doing the service.
Absolutely. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, the things that were strictly forbidden and the things that were absolutely required.
Okay, yeah. The exclusions and inclusions.
Right. So a strict no to yeast leaven, it's often called, or honey. Neither could be in any grain offering brought to the Lord as a gift.
But completely the opposite for salt. Salt was a non-negotiable. Had to be in all offerings.
And it's even called something specific. The salt of the covenant of your God.
Yeah.
That phrase alone tells you it's important.
It really does. And that leads us to another phrase that pops up again and again in the text.
The soothing aroma.
Yeah, a gift of a soothing aroma to the Lord. It really makes you stop and think, what does that actually mean? What makes something soothing to God beyond just, how it smells?
That's a great question. Because it implies something deeper is going on.
It does. And that idea that the soothing aroma is tied to something more than scent leads us to wonder, why all the tiny details? Why so specific?
You might be asking, and some people in the study session certainly did, about the sheer complexity of it all, the time and effort involved.
Why go to all that trouble?
Well, one key insight that came out is this. This whole elaborate ritual, it symbolized God inviting people back into his sacred space.
Like reversing the banishment from Eden from that original Edenic sacred space.
Exactly, where humanity once had that perfect fellowship. So these weren't just random burdensome rules. It was about reestablishing that relationship. But on his terms, purity was essential.
Okay, so let's dig into the meaning behind those exclusions then. Starting with yeast or leaven, what's the deal there?
Well, the sources pointed to several layers. First, its connection to sin. Yeast makes dough puff up, right?
Right.
And that became symbolic of pride, deceit, hypocrisy. Think about Jesus warning his disciples about the yeast of the Pharisees.
Okay, that makes sense. But there was more, wasn't there?
Yes, and this is crucial. Yeast works through fermentation. And fermentation is essentially a process of decay.
Decay, meaning death.
Exactly. Decay means death. And God, who is fundamentally life, light, and love, wanted nothing associated with death or decay in his worship. His space is holy. It's life.
Wow, okay, so yeast represents sin, puffing up, and decay death. What about honey? It seems so natural and sweet. Why was that forbidden?
Well, surprisingly, for similar reasons, honey can also ferment.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it carries that same association with fermentation and decay, just like yeast. But there was another angle too.
What was that?
Honey could also symbolize, perhaps, human effort or a sweetness that comes from ourselves, like relying on your own goodness or works, rather than on the sinless offering God provides.
Ah, interesting. A self-reliance thing.
Possibly. And there's also the point that honey was commonly used in offerings by surrounding pagan nations, so forbidding it clearly set God's worship apart, made it distinct.
Okay, so those are the exclusions. Now the big inclusion, salt. Why was salt so important?
Salt is fascinating. Symbolically, it's the opposite of yeast and honey. It represents preservation.
Right, like preserving food. So life, not decay.
Exactly. Preservation and life. Think about how we use salt in baking or cooking. It can actually neutralize some things, but it also enhances the taste of everything else.
Okay, so a spiritual parallel there.
That's what was suggested, like God's word acting as a neutralizer in our lives, dealing with the negative, but also enhancing the good, bringing out the best flavor, you could say.
And didn't someone mention Jesus' words too?
Yes. His statement, "You are the salt of the earth." It shows this symbolism wasn't just an Old Testament thing. It has lasting significance. And remember, it was called the salt of the covenant. Covenants are lasting agreements. Salt seals it, preserves it.
Got it. And there was one other connection linking back to their history.
Yes. The unleavened bread aspect related to the yeast exclusion. That requirement served as a constant reminder of God's deliverance from Egypt.
Because they left in such a hurry, they didn't have time for the bread to arrive.
Exactly. So that memory, that foundational act of salvation, was baked right into their worship.
So when you put all this together, no yeast, no honey, but definitely salt. What's the big picture message?
The overwhelming emphasis is on a pure offering, a sinless offering. And ultimately, all of this points forward. It speaks of Jesus Christ.
How so?
His sacrifice on the cross, which the source is connected to the fire on the altar acting as judgment, was completely pure, without sin. Just like this ideal grain offering was meant to be.
Okay, that clarifies the symbolism. Now let's talk about the instructions themselves. That level of detail, it's really striking.
It is. And one key takeaway was how this specificity of God's instructions, the type of flour, the ingredients, the exact procedure, was so different from the religions around them.
How so?
It stood in stark contrast to the randomness of pagan religions. Their rituals could be much more arbitrary, sometimes based on appeasing fickle gods.
So God's instructions weren't random, they had purpose.
Exactly. They were described as divine guardrails, designed to protect believers, keep them in line, and ensure their worship was focused and true, not corrupted by pagan ideas.
That makes sense, not just rules for rules' sake.
No, and it goes even deeper. This level of detail, this care and instruction, it really shows God's desire for a personal relationship with his people.
How does detail show relationship?
Well, think about it. He wasn't distant and uncaring. He was actively guiding them, step by step, from slavery to a life of worship. It implies intimacy, involvement, care.
Guiding them into his presence in the right way.
Precisely. And this connects back to that soothing aroma. The study emphasized that what pleased God wasn't just the literal smell of the offering burning.
It was something more.
It was the heart that brings it. The offering required total obedience.
Meaning, if you messed up the recipe, even unintentionally?
Or even intentionally. If you had frankincense but decided not to include it or forgot the salt even though you had it, the sources argued that the aroma was not pleasing to God because it wasn't offered in total obedience.
Wow, that's strict.
It underscores how vital it is to actually listen to God's instructions with patience, with attention, and then crucially, to apply them. Obedience from the heart was key.
Okay, so we have the offering itself, the symbolism, the importance of obedience. How does this fit into the bigger picture, theologically speaking? Let's talk justification, sanctification.
Right. We need to briefly touch on the offering mentioned before, the grain offering in Leviticus chapter 1, the burnt offering.
What was its significance again?
That one symbolized death to self and the embrace of selfless love. It involved blood sacrifice.
And its main purpose.
It was the first offering. Foundational. It represented justification through the shedding of blood, ultimately pointing to the blood of Christ. This offering dealt with the penalty of sin. It covered sins.
So getting right with God, initially, forgiveness.
Exactly. The point was stressed. Justification through Christ's blood is essential for salvation. You can't skip that step. It's being declared righteous, not based on what you do, but on what Christ did.
Okay, so that's the burnt offering justification. Where does the grain offering fit in?
This was a key clarification from the study. The grain offering was not for atonement. It didn't deal with the penalty of sin.
So what was it for?
It was for worship. It, along with other offerings that followed the burnt offering, was about sanctification.
All right, let's define those terms simply. Justification is
freedom from sin's penalty through Jesus' death and resurrection. It's a past tense completed action for the believer. You are justified.
And sanctification.
That's the ongoing process of gaining freedom from sin's power. It happens through things like confession, repentance, walking with God day by day. It's about becoming more like Christ in practice.
And then there's glorification.
Right, that's the future hope, the ultimate removal from sin's presence altogether when we're with God.
So penalty dealt with, justification, power being dealt with, sanctification, presence removed, eventually glorification, and the order matters.
Absolutely crucial. The sources emphasized, burnt offering comes first. Forgiveness, that's forgiveness, then sanctification.
Like putting the horse before the cart.
Exactly. The example given was Cain and Abel. Cain brought a grain offering, basically trying the sanctification worship part without the blood sacrifice first.
And God rejected it.
Right. Abel brought an animal offering, The blood sacrifice representing faith and acknowledging the need for atonement, his was accepted. The lesson: you cannot sidestep the blood of the Lamb. Justification must come before true worship and sanctification can happen.
That's a really important distinction. Now, despite all this specificity, there was also an element of flexibility.
Yes, surprisingly so. The instructions allowed for variations based on affordability and cultural practices. Not everyone could afford the same things.
So what kind of variations?
Well, there were actually 4 divisions, or types, mentioned. Uncooked grain, fine flour. Then cooked grain offerings, baked like cakes.
Yeah.
Or even cooked on a griddle, maybe like ancient waffles or pancakes.
Yeah.
But significantly, these cooked versions use olive oil, but no frankincense.
Why no frankincense?
Because, as we mentioned, it was very expensive. So God made provision for those who couldn't afford it. And there was also a special offering for the first fruits of the grain harvest.
So the takeaway there is
that all are welcome. God wasn't setting up a system only the rich could participate in. There was no excuse from dedicating ourselves in our offerings to God, whatever our economic situation.
That's powerful. But it raises a practical question, which came up in the study. Where do the Israelites even get grain? They were in the wilderness, mostly shepherds, right? Not farmers?
Good question. The likely explanation is they brought stored grain from Egypt with them when they left.
Ah, okay.
So think of what that means for this offering. In a way, God was asking them to let it go, to give back something they were carefully hoarding, something essential for their survival.
That requires a lot of trust.
A huge act of trust in his provision for their future. It wasn't just giving surplus, it was giving what they relied on.
And this whole theme of grain, daily provision, it connects forward too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The grain offerings, the daily manna God provided in the wilderness, it all points towards Jesus as the bread of life in the New Testament.
Reminding us we need that daily spiritual nourishment from him, from his word, just like the Israelites needed daily manna.
Exactly. It's an ongoing dependence.
So bringing this all together now, we've looked at the ancient ritual, the symbols, the theology. What does it mean for us today in our worship?
Well, the core reminder is that the grain offering was fundamentally an act of worship, not just empty ritual. It emphasized obedience, sanctification, and the importance of giving from the heart.
And how does that translate, since we don't do these literal offerings anymore?
The connection was made directly to New Testament ideas of sacrificial giving. Think about Philippians 4.12. Paul is talking about a gift the Philippian church sent him.
What does he call it?
He calls their gift a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, very pleasing to God.
Using the same language as Leviticus.
Exactly. And the context is crucial. This gift came from one of the poorest churches in the region. They gave out of their scarcity, not their abundance, and they gave willingly. That's what glorified God.
It wasn't about the amount, but the heart and the sacrifice.
Precisely. And think about the story of the widow's offering in Mark's gospel.
The 2 small coins.
Yeah, worth almost nothing in monetary terms. But Jesus saw it completely differently. He recognized that what she was giving was from her heart and her faith and her trust that God was going to take care of everything she needed.
So again, it confirms that God values sacrificial giving far beyond just the dollar amount. It's about the cost to the giver, the trust involved.
So, connecting ancient offerings, New Testament examples, and today. The understanding is that while Christians no longer do these sacrifices literally,
our worship looks different now.
Right. Instead, our acts of service, our helping our brothers and sisters, our giving, whether money, time, resources, these are the things that please God now.
Yeah.
They are our modern day fragrant offering.
And this leads right into that major call in Romans 12, doesn't it?
It does. The call to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, not dead sacrifice, living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God.
Which Paul calls
a spiritual act of worship.
Yeah.
It's not just about Sunday morning, it's our whole lives. It includes sharing with God's partners in the gospel, participating in giving, whether through money or time, importantly, without making comparisons or focusing on amounts.
So living out our faith daily, serving others, giving generously, that is worship.
That's the essence. Total obedience to God's instructions, which today involves loving God and neighbor and sharing with God's partners in the gospel. That's a true spiritual act of worship.
Wow, what a journey we've taken. From the really specific details of ancient grain offerings, unpacking their rich symbolism, life versus death, sin versus purity.
Seeing God's deep desire for a personal relationship expressed through his guidance and call for obedience.
Understanding that crucial difference and order between justification, getting right with God through Christ, and sanctification, the ongoing process of living it out.
And then seeing how these timeless principles really do transform into heartfelt, sacrificial worship in our lives today.
It really does bring it home. So as we wrap up, maybe a few things for you, the listener, to reflect on.
Yeah, building on all this, maybe ask yourself, when was the last time you gave to God time, resources, energy in a way that genuinely stretched you, maybe even depleted your reserves a bit, really requiring you to trust Him to provide.
That's a challenging one. Or think about this. We all have emotional clutter and distractions in life. How might those be impacting your dedicated time with God time that Romans 12 calls part of our spiritual act of worship? Are distractions crowding out that intentional presence?
And finally, just consider, how can you practically offer yourself as that living sacrifice today, tomorrow? Not just through formal giving, but maybe through simple daily acts of service, through being intentionally present with God and for others.
Lots to think about. We really encourage you to mull over these questions, maybe even go back and read Leviticus 2 for yourself with these ideas in mind.
There's always so much value to find in digging into God's Word.
Absolutely. We hope this deep dive has been helpful and maybe sparked some fresh perspectives for you. Thanks for joining us.